Agatha Raisin, and the Christmas pudding murder. Dear listeners, welcome to tonight's mystery. I'm Sam, your host, and I'm delighted to have you join me for another captivating tale. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from tonight? Are you relaxing at home, on the go, or somewhere a bit unexpected? Share your answer in the comments. I always enjoy hearing from our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and dive into tonight's story. Chapter 1. A Very Carsley Christmas begins. Agatha Raisin had always liked the way her cottage felt in December, when the air outside sharpened with frost and the hearth inside crackled with eager warmth. This year she had gone overboard with decorations. Garlands hung from the mantelpiece, a bowl of bright berries sat on the windowsill, and a small artificial tree blinked cheerfully from the corner. She was adjusting a crooked ribbon near the fireplace when a sudden rustle at the front door interrupted her focus. She turned and spotted an envelope resting on the mat, like a visitor too timid to knock. It shimmered faintly in the warm light, its edges trimmed in gold leaf and its surface embossed with an elaborate crest she didn't recognize. "Oh, what now?" Agatha muttered, though curiosity nudged beneath her irritation. She picked it up, feeling the weight of the thick paper. No return address, no name on the front, only a wax seal stamped with the image of a pudding crowned with holly. Agatha arched an eyebrow. That's either charming or ominous. Breaking the seal, she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was elegant to the point of being theatrical, the kind that belonged to someone who collected fountain pens. As she read the invitation aloud, her voice carried amusement and disbelief. "You are hereby cordially invited to the Carsley Grand Pudding Cook-Off, held at the gracious estate of Mr. Jasper Thorne." Agatha paused. Jasper Thorne. She had heard the name only once or twice since he moved to the village a few months ago. An eccentric newcomer with deep pockets and peculiar habits, according to gossip. Apparently, he had bought Thorne Manor and restored it with a level of extravagance that even the wealthiest neighbors found excessive. Her eyes drifted down the page. She read, "All participants are required to present a traditional Christmas pudding with a personal twist and must attend the festive unveiling on the evening before the event, promptly at 8. "Personal twist," Agatha scoffed. "What am I meant to add? Paprika? Sardines?" The idea of cooking anything complicated made her sigh, yet the exclusivity of the invitation tugged at her pride. Carsley rarely produced events grand enough for gold-trimmed stationery. She set the letter on the coffee table and stepped back, studying it as though it might reveal more if she looked long enough. The tone felt too formal, too deliberate, as if Jasper Thorne had something to prove or something to conceal. Why invite her of all people? She hadn't cooked a pudding in her life. She didn't even like pudding competitions. But the promise of gossip had a magnetic pull, and her instincts tingled with the faint warning she recognized from past mysteries. Outside, a pair of carolers passed by, their faint singing drifting through the window. The village felt peaceful, wrapped in its usual holiday charm, yet the invitation introduced a small ripple underneath the surface. Something about it nagged at her, urging her to pay attention. She picked it up again, tapping the edge lightly against her palm. "Jasper Thorne," she murmured. "What exactly are you planning?" The cottage lights glowed softly, as if encouraging her decision. Agatha slipped the letter into her pocket and straightened her shoulders. Whether she liked pudding or not, she knew she wouldn't be able to ignore this invitation. Before she moved away from the fireplace, she wandered to the window and peered out at the lane. Snow dusted the hedges, and everything looked ordinary, but Agatha felt the shift, the way some people sensed a coming storm. The invitation wasn't just a festive gesture. It carried a tension she couldn't name, and that, she admitted, was precisely what made it irresistible. Agatha stepped out into the crisp morning, pulling her coat snugly around her as she made her way toward the village. The snow from the night before had settled in soft mounds along the hedges, giving Carsley the look of a picture-perfect postcard. She normally enjoyed seeing the village in this state, quiet, bright, and filled with the faint promise of warm pastries. But today, her thoughts circled around the gilded invitation tucked in her pocket. The bakery door chimed as she entered, releasing a wave of comforting warmth and the scent of cinnamon. Mrs. Bloxby stood at the counter, chatting with John Fletcher, who had the self-satisfied look of someone delivering news before anyone else could. He paused mid-sentence when he spotted Agatha. "Well, speak of the devil," he said with a smirk. "Just talking about you." Mrs. Bloxby smiled kindly. "Morning, Agatha. You received an invitation too, didn't you?" Agatha gave a casual shrug. "I did. Seems half the village has." John puffed up. "Half? More like a chosen few. Jasper Thorne is only inviting people he considers noteworthy." He lifted his chin, as if the term belonged to him alone. Agatha bit back a remark and leaned on the counter. "What's the general opinion of Jasper Thorne these days, apart from his impeccable taste in expensive paper?" Mrs. Bloxby lowered her voice, as though the walls might be listening. "He's unusual. Very generous with donations to village events, but it feels a touch forced. And there are rumors." John nodded eagerly. "Loads of them. Some say he inherited his fortune after a nasty family feud. Others claim he left London because of some scandal, though no one seems to know what it was." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "And you believe all that?" "I believe something's off," John replied, looking pleased with himself. "No one spends that much money to impress people without wanting something in return." Mrs. Bloxby gave him a disapproving look, but didn't disagree. "He does seem very eager to be accepted," she admitted softly, "almost as if he's running out of time." The bakery door chimed again, and several villagers entered, all murmuring about the same topic. Agatha scanned the room and noticed a pattern. Those clutching identical invitations looked tense rather than excited, as though attending the event were an obligation instead of a privilege. Near the corner table, a woman Agatha recognized from the gardening club hastily shoved a gold-trimmed envelope into her handbag when she noticed Agatha watching. Their eyes met briefly, and the woman flashed a strained smile before quickly looking away. Agatha's instincts sharpened. That wasn't the reaction of someone thrilled about a festive cook-off. She ordered a scone and joined Mrs. Bloxby at a small table. "So, what's this about a feud?" she asked, stirring her tea. Mrs. Bloxby glanced around before answering. "Just whispers. Something about a distant cousin contesting the inheritance. They say Jasper came here to escape the family tension." John leaned in, lowering his voice dramatically. "Or to hide from it. Depends who you ask." Agatha took a thoughtful bite of her scone. The rumors varied too wildly to be harmless village chatter. Someone was covering something, or several people were. "And the cook-off?" she asked. "Why a Christmas pudding competition of all things?" Mrs. Bloxby sighed. "He claimed he wanted to bring the village together in good spirit." John snorted, more like he wants to show off that manner of his. The bakery door opened again, and a chill swept in. A tall man stood there, invitation in hand, but the moment he caught the room's attention, he folded it quickly and tucked it out of sight. His expression mirrored the unease Agatha had spotted earlier. She rose, finishing her tea. "Well," she said lightly, "sounds like Jasper Thorne is either very generous or very troubled." Mrs. Bloxby placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Just be careful, Agatha. These grand gestures rarely come without strings." Agatha nodded, her curiosity fully awakened. As she stepped back into the snowy street, the village no longer felt quite as peaceful as it had that morning. Beneath the festive decorations and holiday cheer, something was stirring, quiet, uneasy, and waiting to be uncovered.
Chapter 2. The Host with Too Many Secrets. Agatha approached Thorne Manor with the cautious curiosity of someone stepping into a story she wasn't sure she wanted to read. The estate rose above the snowy fields like a well-polished relic from a grander age, its stone walls wrapped in garlands and twinkling lights. From a distance, it looked festive and inviting. Up close, It felt too pristine, as though the decorations were arranged for an audience rather than for celebration. Her boots crunched over the gravel as she walked to the towering front doors. They swung open before she reached them, revealing a uniformed footman who bowed stiffly. His expression held the tight strain of someone who had rehearsed his welcome too many times. "Ms. Raisin," he said, "Mr. Thorne is expecting you." "Is he now?" Agatha replied, brushing snow from her coat. "How flattering." Inside, the entry hall glittered with holiday cheer. A massive tree dominated the space, its branches heavy with ornaments shaped like miniature puddings and golden keys. Ribbons cascaded from the top like a waterfall of silk. On any other occasion, Agatha might have admired the effort. Today, she sensed that the grandeur was meant to distract. She spotted Jasper Thorne at the far end of the hall, greeting guests with exaggerated warmth. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the brittle confidence of a man desperate to impress. His smile widened when he saw her. "Ms. Raisin," he exclaimed, grasping her hands in both of his. "A delight, truly. Welcome to my humble little den of Christmas chaos." "Humble isn't the word I'd use," she said dryly, glancing around at the gleaming decorations. "Oh, this? Just a touch of holiday spirit." He waved his hand, as though the opulence had sprung up overnight by accident. "I'm so pleased you could join the preliminary tour before the big event. It's important that everyone feels comfortable." Something in the way he said comfortable made Agatha's instinct stretch awake. As Jasper turned to greet another guest, Agatha took the opportunity to observe the room. The invited villagers milled about, sipping spiced drinks and making small talk. Their smiles looked strained, their conversations polite but stiff. No laughter, no ease, only watchful eyes and half-hidden tension. A woman in an emerald dress stood near the staircase, clutching her handbag as though it were a lifeline. She flinched when a waiter passed too close. Agatha made a mental note of her. "Quite the spectacle, isn't it?" someone muttered beside her. Agatha turned to see a young staff member adjusting a tray of pastries on a side table. His movements were careful, his expression wary. "You could say that," Agatha replied. "Jasper does seem determined to put on a show." "He always is," the staffer said under his breath, "especially after last year's He stopped abruptly, eyes widening as if he'd stepped on a trap. Straightening, he offered an overly formal smile. "Enjoy your evening, madam." Then he hurried away. Agatha's interest sharpened. Last year's what? Before she could follow him, a group of guests drifted between them. Agatha sighed and wandered toward the dining hall, where delicate strings of lights framed the doorway. Just as she reached it, she noticed a door to the left, narrow, wooden, and firmly locked. Unlike the rest of the house, it bore no decoration. She approached it casually and tried the handle. It didn't budge. "Storage," Jasper's voice said behind her, cheerful but tight. "Nothing exciting. Old furniture, forgotten bits. You know how it is." "I wasn't aware I was being supervised," Agatha said, giving him a pleasant smile. "Of course not. I simply like to ensure my guests are well guided." "Or well managed," she muttered. A brief flicker crossed his expression, something sharp, weary, almost frightened, but he smoothed it away quickly. "Shall we join the others? There's mulled wine." As they walked back toward the hall, Agatha glanced once more over her shoulder at the locked door. It stood silent and unremarkable, yet it called to her like the first clue in a puzzle, and she knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that Thorne Manor was hiding more than extra furniture.
Agatha Raisin had barely taken her first sip of the mulled wine, too sweet, too clovey, when Jasper Thorne clapped his hands for attention. The gestures snapped through the room like a starting pistol. Chatter died away. A dozen guests, clustered in uneven little groups around the drawing room, turned to face their host with a mix of curiosity and polite dread. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jasper began, flashing a smile that showed far too many teeth for comfort, "it's time to review the rules for our grand Christmas pudding cook-off." Agatha raised an eyebrow. Rules. Of course there would be rules. Men like Jasper always had rules. Excessively detailed ones, too. He gestured theatrically toward a small table behind him, where a stack of parchment-colored papers lay waiting. A flicker of unease skimmed through the room. "First," Jasper said, lifting one sheet between gloved fingers, "all puddings must be presented at midnight on the night of the event." There was a soft rustle as guests shifted in discomfort. "Midnight?" Agatha immediately spotted the confusion ripple across faces. Mrs. Cummings-Brown's sharp frown, Mr. Fletcher's puzzled blink, the vicar's niece biting her lip as though wondering whether that was past her bedtime. "Midnight?" Agatha repeated under her breath. "What is this? A dessert séance?" Jasper continued as if he hadn't noticed. "Secondly, and this is quite important, the creator of each pudding must stand beside their entry when the judging begins." "Why?" someone blurted from the back. Jasper's smile cooled a degree. "To ensure fairness." Agatha doubted very much that fairness had anything to do with it. "And thirdly," Agatha added, holding up the parchment, "I must receive the complete recipe from each of you beforehand. Tonight, ideally. Full ingredients, method, measurements. No secrets." There was a stunned silence. Even the candles seemed to hesitate in their flickering. Agatha felt her suspicion coil tighter. Why would a man hosting a festive, supposedly friendly competition need everyone's recipes ahead of time? And why insist on midnight judging? She shot a glance at Mrs. Bloxby, who looked troubled, hands twisting in her lap. Around her, whispered protests began. "This is unusual. Is he serious? Surely a joke." But Jasper was not joking. He had stepped aside toward the parchment stack, encouraging everyone to take one. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling predatory attentiveness as he watched each guest approach the table. Agatha caught that look and felt a cold thread of instinct tug behind her ribs. There was something he was waiting for, anticipating, measuring. As she stepped toward the table, she noticed a disturbance on the far right side, two contestants arguing in low, heated tones. Agatha recognized them: Melanie Porter, the overly cheerful florist, and Bernard Pike, the village's self-appointed culinary expert. "I placed mine there," she hissed. "It was right on top. And I'm telling you, it wasn't complete. You were missing half the measurements." "The page was there, Bernard." Agatha slowed her steps. Missing page. She reached the recipe table and scanned it. The stack of blank forms seemed untouched, but beside them, among the scattered sample recipe sheets Jasper had provided, she spotted a clear gap, a torn edge, a missing page. Someone had taken something. She lifted the nearest sheet and pretended to read it while discreetly observing the room. Several guests were filling out their forms reluctantly. A few had retreated to corners, conferring nervously. And there, near the archway, one man stood alone, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on Jasper with a look that wasn't fear so much as expectation. Agatha felt her curiosity sharpen to a point. Jasper, meanwhile, had resumed his place at the center of the room, smiling with an air of crisp command. "Please remember," he said lightly, "these rules ensure we all begin our holiday festivities on a level playing field." Agatha doubted that. She doubted it very much. Midnight. Required presence. Pre-submitted recipes. A missing page. Tense contestants. A host who watched everything too closely. This was no ordinary Christmas tradition. This was a puzzle, wrapped in tinsel, dusted with sugar, and served with a warning she could almost taste. And Agatha Raisin, never one to ignore the scent of trouble, felt her next steps forming already.
Chapter 3. The Pudding Preparations. Agatha Raisin surveyed her small kitchen with a mixture of determination and mild dread. Christmas was only a fortnight away, and the idea of participating in Jasper Thorne's grand Christmas pudding cook-off had somehow lodged itself firmly in her thoughts. Normally, she would have refused outright, citing her lack of culinary flair, or, more honestly, her sheer laziness. Yet there was something about the invitation, and Jasper's overly formal insistence on a personal twist, that niggled at her curiosity.
A challenge, especially one sprinkled with hints of village gossip and competition, was always difficult for her to resist. Her first task was rummaging through her collection of cookbooks, a rather haphazard assortment that ranged from dusty handwritten volumes to glossy modern guides with more pictures than instruction. Flipping through page after page, she muttered under her breath, debating whether she should attempt a classic suet pudding or risk something more adventurous. It was then that a soft knock at the door startled her. Peering through the frosted window, she saw Miss Tilly Cobb, the shy village librarian, clutching a small envelope and looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Miss Cobb, what brings you here?" Agatha asked, brushing flour from her apron as she opened the door. Tilly hesitated before handing over the envelope. I thought you might like this," she stammered. Inside was a worn, yellowed recipe card, edges frayed and corners folded. "It belonged to Mrs. Hargrove," Tilly whispered, her voice dropping even lower. She passed away many years ago, under unusual circumstances. People say she made the best Christmas pudding Carsley has ever seen." Agatha took the card with a mixture of awe and suspicion. The handwriting was elegant but strange, with tiny symbols in the margins that looked almost like code. A faint, faded stain ran across one corner, as though someone had spilled something mysterious decades ago. She turned it over carefully, her imagination instantly alight with possibilities. A recipe left behind by a woman who had died mysteriously? It was the perfect mix of cozy tradition and intrigue. Setting the card on the counter, Agatha began gathering her ingredients. Butter, sugar, currants, and suet sat beside bowls and mixing spoons, while she consulted the card, muttering aloud. She measured, stirred, and added small twists of her own, all the while glancing at the cryptic notations. What could they mean? A dash of this, a pinch of that. Nothing seemed to match modern conventions. Yet somehow she followed the instructions, determined not to ruin a pudding that had evidently been treasured by generations of Carsley cooks. As she mixed, a sudden sense of being watched prickled the back of her neck. At first she dismissed it as imagination, a side effect of working alone in her cozy cottage with only the hiss of the kettle and the soft crackle of the fire for company. But then she heard it, a faint scraping, almost imperceptible, from outside her window. Agatha paused, spoon in midair, and tiptoed to the curtain. No one was there. Still the sensation lingered, a subtle reminder that the festive calm of her kitchen was not entirely safe from intrusion. Shaking off the unease, she returned to her work, folding the batter with deliberate care. The kitchen filled with the warm, comforting aroma of sweet spices and simmering fruit. For a moment it was almost peaceful, almost ordinary, almost enough for her to forget the strange markings, the mysterious recipe, and the invisible eyes that seemed to linger just beyond the glass. And yet, somewhere in the back of her mind, Agatha knew this Christmas pudding would be unlike any other she had ever made, and that whatever secrets it held might only reveal themselves when the moment was right. By the time the batter was ready and the pudding steaming in its basin, the cozy domesticity had a thin edge of tension. The fire crackled warmly, the kettle hissed, and the cottage seemed perfectly ordinary, but Agatha could not shake the feeling that the holiday calm was only a fragile cover for something quietly watching, waiting, just outside her door.
Agatha had barely tied her apron when a sharp knock broke the quiet rhythm of her kitchen. She paused, wooden spoon in hand, eyeing the half-measured ingredients scattered across the counter. Visitors were the last thing she expected tonight, especially with the pudding preparations growing more complicated by the minute. With a sigh, she wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door to find Bill Wong standing on her step, breath puffing in the cold air. "Evening, Agatha," he said, sounding far too serious for someone visiting during pudding season. He stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. "I won't take long. I just needed to check on you." His eyes flicked to the mixing bowl as though expecting to find something sinister bubbling inside. "You're involved in that cook-off at Thorn Manor, aren't you?" Agatha folded her arms. "I am. And before you say anything, no, I'm not sabotaging anyone. Yet." She gave him a pointed look, but Bill didn't smile. Instead, he lowered his voice. "Be careful around Jasper Thorn," he murmured. "Something's off about the whole event. I've been hearing things. Odd complaints, people backing out last minute, small disputes that don't add up. And Jasper himself, he draws trouble like moths to a flame." Before Agatha could press him, another knock sounded, sharper, almost impatient. Bill stepped aside as Agatha opened the door again, revealing a woman in a burgundy coat and neatly wrapped scarf. She looked familiar, though Agatha couldn't place her immediately. "Agatha Raisin?" the woman asked. "I'm Sarah Holmes. May I come in?" Sarah swept inside before Agatha could answer. Her composure was tight, her gaze sharp enough to slice through biscuit dough. She set her gloves on the table and exhaled, as though bracing herself. "I hear you're taking part in Jasper's little spectacle," she said. "I thought you should know what he's capable of." Agatha folded her arms. "I am. And before you say anything, no, I'm not sabotaging anyone. Yet." She gave him a pointed look, but Bill didn't smile. Instead, he lowered his voice. "Be careful around Jasper Thorn," he murmured. "Something's off about the whole event. I've been hearing things. Odd complaints, people backing out last minute, small disputes that don't add up. And Jasper himself, he draws trouble like moths to a flame." Before Agatha could press him, another knock sounded, sharper, almost impatient. Bill stepped aside as Agatha opened the door again, revealing a woman in a burgundy coat and neatly wrapped scarf. She looked familiar, though Agatha couldn't place her immediately. "Agatha Raisin?" the woman asked. "I'm Sarah Holmes. May I come in?" Sarah swept inside before Agatha could answer. Her composure was tight, her gaze sharp enough to slice through biscuit dough. She set her gloves on the table and exhaled, as though bracing herself. "I hear you're taking part in Jasper's little spectacle," she said. "I thought you should know what he's capable of." Agatha exchanged a glance with Bill, then gestured for Sarah to continue. "My family once trusted Jasper. Years ago, he invested in a business my brother was building. At first, everything seemed generous, too generous. He offered help, advice, guidance, until the moment things went wrong. He turned on us, blamed us for decisions he pushed, then threatened to ruin our reputation unless we walked away quietly." She clasped her hands, steady but trembling at the fingertips. "We lost everything tied to that venture." Bill frowned. "I didn't know it was that severe." "Most don't," Sarah said. "He prefers it that way." Agatha felt the kitchen shrink around them. The warm sense of spice and citrus suddenly seemed thin, like a veil hiding something colder. "So you're saying he's untrustworthy, and this cook-off isn't what it appears," Sarah finished. "He doesn't do anything without it angle." The conversation lingered, tension thick as syrup, until Sarah finally retrieved her gloves and thanked Agatha for listening. Bill offered one last caution before following her out. When the cottage door closed, silence settled heavily. Agatha returned to her counter, expecting comfort in the familiar clutter, but the moment she looked at her ingredients, a chill crept up her spine. Something was wrong. The sugar jar sat open, though she distinctly remembered sealing it. The nutmeg had been moved closer to the edge, and her mixing bowl held a faint trace of something she hadn't added. Nothing was missing, yet everything looked touched, handled by someone who shouldn't have been there. She stood still, breath shallow. Someone had entered her cottage. Someone had meddled with her preparations. Instead of fear, a spark of determination flared inside her. Whoever was playing games had underestimated her badly. She steadied herself, prepared for whatever came next tonight.
Chapter 4. Tension at Thorn Manor. The dining hall at Thorn Manor glittered with candlelight, silverware, and holly-studded arrangements. Yet the warmth felt strangely artificial, as if the decorations were trying too hard to lull everyone into a sense of comfort they didn't quite feel. Agatha entered with a steady stride, shrugging off the cold and offering a brisk nod to the other guests. Jasper Thorne stood at the head of the long table, wearing an elegant burgundy jacket and a smile so polished it almost gleamed more than the crystal glasses. "Welcome, dear friends," Jasper announced. "Tonight marks the beginning of our glorious Christmas festivities. Do take your seats." Agatha slipped into her place, eyeing the guests around her. John Fletcher sat stiffly, as though afraid to wrinkle his shirt. Mrs. Bloxby gave Agatha a gentle smile, though her eyes darted toward Jasper with cautious curiosity. Across the table, Miranda Green fussed with her napkin, muttering something to the man beside her, far too quietly for casual conversation. Even from here, Agatha could sense the friction. The first course arrived with cloches lifted in theatrical swirls, yet the warmth around the table only sharpened. Conversations dipped into whispers or rose abruptly into forced cheer. Jasper glided from guest to guest, asking superficial questions while ignoring more probing inquiries about his travels or his reasons for hosting such a grand event. As Agatha sampled the soup, she noticed a staff member slip behind the dining hall's decorated archway. Something about the movement tugged at her memory. A narrow corridor, a polished brass handle, and, yes, the locked door, the one Jasper seemed so determined to keep hidden. Tonight, however, she saw the staff member open it with practiced ease before disappearing inside. She leaned slightly in her chair for a better angle, but Jasper's voice rang out at that precise moment. "Miss Raisin, I trust the food is to your liking?" "It's excellent," Agatha replied, masking her curiosity. "Your staff must be very dedicated." Jasper's smile didn't waver, but something tightened behind it. "They are well trained." Another course arrived, though the air around the table felt brittle. Small rivalries surfaced like cracks in ice. A sharp remark between Miranda and John, a pointed glare exchanged between two cousins, and a hushed argument at the far end between Mrs. Pringle and her nephew over something neither wished to explain. By dessert, the room seemed ready to snap. A Christmas pudding adorned with sugared berries was placed elegantly before them, its scent rich and inviting. Agatha lifted her fork, but before she could take the first bite, a sharp scrape echoed from across the table. Everyone turned. Gerald Porter, the quiet accountant, invited for reasons no one could quite determine, pushed back his chair with trembling hands. His face had drained of color, leaving him pale as candle wax. I'm terribly sorry," he stammered, standing abruptly. "I need a moment." Without waiting for permission or explanation, he hurried out of the room, nearly tripping over his own feet. A murmur rippled through the guests. Jasper maintained his smile, though it now looked more like a mask. "Indigestion, perhaps," he said lightly. "Do continue." But few did. Even the pudding's comforting aroma couldn't ease the unease rolling through the hall. Agatha scanned the faces around her, worried, tense, pretending to be calm. Something was building beneath the pleasant veneer, something no one wanted to name yet. Just as she reached for her water, the lights above flickered. Once, twice, then again, longer this time, as if the entire manor shivered. Gasps filled the room. The candles wavered. A cold whisper of dread slid through Agatha's spine. Whatever facade Jasper had built around this festive gathering was beginning to crack, and everyone at the table could feel it. The manor's grand hall had never felt smaller than it did that night, under the high vaulted ceilings and chandeliers sparkling with frosted crystals. Midnight approached like a slow drumbeat, and the air inside Thorne Manor grew thick with nerves, spice, and something else, something metallic and sharp, almost imperceptible but undeniable. Agatha stepped inside, balancing her modest pudding on a silver tray, and immediately sensed the tension that had been simmering all evening was about to boil over. Contestants bustled around her, carrying bowls, ladles, and plates with varying degrees of skill and panic. Mrs. Cummings-Brown's hands shook so violently that Agatha feared the entire confection might spill onto the polished floor. Across the hall, two other entrants whispered furiously, eyes darting toward one another, then snapping to Jasper, who circled the room like a hawk, inspecting every tray with unnerving precision. Agatha caught sight of a small spat. Utensils had gone missing. A spoon here, a knife there, each absence sending minor chaos rippling through the room. Voices rose and fell in murmured complaints, clipped arguments exchanged under the veneer of polite decorum. It was as if everyone knew the rules were outlandishly strict, yet someone or something was purposefully testing them. From the corner of her eye, Agatha spotted Jasper stopping abruptly near a cluster of contestants. His brow furrowed. He exhaled sharply and gestured with an almost imperceptible flick of his hand. "Efficiency, please. We are wasting precious minutes. Midnight waits for no one." His tone was light, almost jovial, yet carried the weight of command. Agatha was about to step toward the table to arrange her pudding when a piercing scream cut through the hall. It came from the kitchen area. The sound was short, frantic, and brittle, freezing every head in place. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in hurried footsteps, scraping chairs and the shuffling of gowns and coats. Agatha moved with the rest, her mind alert, senses tingling with suspicion. Inside the kitchen, chaos reigned. A large mixing bowl lay toppled, its contents smeared across the stone tiles. Splashes of rich, dark pudding left patterns as if forming a message or a clue, though what it meant remained frustratingly elusive. Contestants circled the mess, whispering accusations, shaking heads, and checking their own trays. Not one of them admitted responsibility, not a soul. Jasper appeared behind the crowd, voice firm. "The competition must proceed," he insisted, his usual charming mask replaced by a taut, commanding edge. Agatha was about to step toward the table to arrange her pudding, when straightening, clutching her tray with steady hands, her mind racing. Whatever this night held, it was no ordinary pudding competition, and she intended to see every secret it was trying to reveal. Chapter 5. The Murder Revealed. The hall was silent, but for the ticking of a distant grandfather clock. Agatha stood near her pudding, fingers gripping the tray, her eyes darting across the expectant faces of the other contestants. Midnight had arrived, the rules now binding, the tension palpable. The grand chandeliers above flickered faintly, and a chill ran through the room despite the warmth of the hearth. Then, without warning, Jasper Thorne staggered backward from the head of the display table. His hands flailed, trying to steady himself on the polished surface. Gasps erupted as he teetered, then toppled face first into one of the beautifully decorated pudding bowls. The rich, dark dessert splattered across the table and floor in a sudden, grotesque arc. The sharp aroma of burnt sugar and alcohol filled Agatha's nostrils, striking her with immediate alarm. "Jasper!" she cried, pushing through the cluster of stunned guests. Kneeling beside him, she felt for a pulse, but there was none. His head rested in the ruined pudding, and the warmth of life was gone. Agatha's stomach churned. He was dead. A scream tore through the hall, followed by hurried footsteps and panicked whispers. Guests pressed toward the exits, only to collide with locked doors. The heavy oak panels that had seemed decorative moments ago now held them captive. Agatha's eyes widened as she realized the manor had activated an automatic lock. No one could leave, not until the authorities arrived, or until the situation resolved itself. "Everyone, remain calm." A voice, her own, steadier than she felt, cut through the chaos. But the panic in the room was tangible. People were stepping on each other's toes, chairs scraped the floor, and trembling hands reached for coats or trays in a useless attempt to flee. Agatha scanned the table. The bowl that had once held Jasper's Christmas pudding lay shattered, shards of ceramic glinting in the chandelier light. The pudding itself was a blackened, sticky mess, the burnt scent stronger now, curling upward as if the heat had carried something more sinister than dessert. Smoke had not yet risen, but the odor hinted at tampering, or at least at something out of the ordinary. Guests muttered nervously, some looking as if they suspected each other, some staring wide-eyed at the lifeless form of the host. Even Mrs. Bloxby and John Fletcher, typically composed, were pale, glancing between one another as if recalculating everything they thought they knew about the evening. Agatha's gaze swept the room, noting subtle details. The sharp edge of a broken spoon near Jasper's shoulder, a small burn mark along the rim of the tray, and a smudge of dark pudding that led across the polished floor. The pieces of the scene seemed random at first, but the keen eye in her mind suspected otherwise. Her thoughts raced. Every guest had motive now, every tension-filled rivalry, every whispered complaint, every secret exchanged. And with the manor locked, they were all trapped in a gilded cage with the murderer. The festive decorations now mocked the terror lurking beneath, holly and tinsel framing the grim tableau. Agatha rose slowly, smoothing her hands against her apron. Her heart pounded, but her mind began to pivot, scanning, analyzing. The burnt smell, the shattered bowl, the automatic locks, they were clues layered into the chaos. Whoever had done this had done it deliberately with knowledge of the manor's design and of Jasper's habits. And that meant one thing. The killer was not just among them. They were watching, waiting, and perhaps planning their next move. Agatha took a careful step back, allowing the room to absorb her presence. Her eyes lingered on the ruined pudding one last time. The sweet smell had turned acrid. Festive cheer had turned to dread, and the cozy manner of Thorn had revealed the first shocking brushstroke of a deadly mystery.
Chapter 6. Clues in the Shadows. Agatha approached the locked door once more, her curiosity a tight coil in her chest. The storm outside rattled the window panes, snow piling high against the manor walls. But inside, the silence of the hallway was almost suffocating. With a careful twist of the key she had found tucked in the footman's silver tray earlier, discreetly acquired during the chaos, she felt the lock click open. A soft shiver ran down her spine as she pushed the door, revealing a narrow, dimly lit room that smelled faintly of aged paper and candle wax. Stacks of letters lined the walls, tied together with fraying ribbons. Their envelopes yellowed and brittle. Financial ledgers rested beside them, dusty but clearly maintained, while photographs in black and white and sepia captured faces frozen in time. Agatha picked up one frame carefully, Jasper standing beside a younger man who bore an uncanny resemblance to several of tonight's guests. She traced the faint smile with her finger, noting the subtle tension in the younger man's posture. Jasper had always been good at charm, she thought, but these photos told a story of strained relations, half-hidden resentments, and unresolved disputes. A soft shuffle behind her made Agatha turn sharply. The staff member from earlier stood in the doorway, hands raised as if to ward her off. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, voice tense. "This room, it's private. Jasper didn't want anyone seeing these." "I think it's rather important to see," Agatha replied calmly, closing the door behind him. The young man's eyes flickered, a mixture of fear and something closer to loyalty. "I serve someone else," he said, swallowing. "Not him anymore, his cousin. If anyone knew what was here—" His voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. He wasn't protecting Jasper so much as safeguarding the interests of the family heir waiting in the wings. Agatha nodded, absorbing the significance. "Then help me understand, if you can," she urged, "because someone used this evening for something far more sinister than a pudding contest." He hesitated, then stepped back, allowing her to examine the ledgers and letters more closely. Agatha scanned dates and names, noticing entries that aligned with disputes among tonight's guests, financial transfers, disagreements, and references to expected outcomes hinted that Jasper had intended a dramatic revelation during the cook-off, perhaps to expose some wrongdoings or claim leverage over the attendees. But the scattered papers suggested that he had been preempted. Someone had anticipated his plans and struck first, turning the tables before Jasper could act. Agatha's mind raced as she pieced together the timeline. The scream in the kitchen, the toppled puddings, the scorched parchment, all of it now fit into a larger puzzle. The staff member swallowed nervously again. "You should be careful. Not everyone wants these secrets uncovered. Some would do anything to stop them." Agatha gave him a sharp look, then returned to the stacks of letters. Each envelope, each photograph, each carefully preserved note revealed another layer of Jasper's world, a world built on tension, manipulation, and long-hidden grudges. And one thing was clear. Someone had turned that world upside down tonight, and Agatha Raisin was the only person in the manor capable of unraveling it.
Agatha stood in the center of the drawing room, hands clasped lightly, her eyes scanning the gathered guests. The storm outside had intensified, snow swirling against the tall windows, a white blur against the flickering candlelight. Everyone was restless, shifting on their feet, murmuring nervously to neighbors, aware that escape was impossible and secrets could no longer hide. It was the perfect moment for confrontation. She began with Mrs. Bloxby, whose sharp eyes had followed every move since dinner. "You seem unusually tense tonight," Agatha said gently. "Is there something you need to tell me?" The elderly woman hesitated, glancing at her neighbors before sighing. "I suppose it's only fair," she admitted. "I've been worried about financial arrangements between some of us and Jasper. Some promises were made and not kept, and a few of us lost out because of it. I didn't intend harm, of course, but there's been tension." Agatha nodded thoughtfully, committing the confession to memory. She moved to John Fletcher next, who had been unusually quiet all evening. "I had my own quarrel with Jasper," he muttered reluctantly. "Business dealings that went sour years ago. I didn't like him much then, and I don't like him now. But murder, that's beyond me." Step by step, Agatha spoke with each guest, drawing out grievances, rivalries, and minor acts of sabotage during the competition. Switches, ingredients switched, utensils borrowed and forgotten, subtle attempts to unsettle others, but no one admitted to the fatal act. She listened carefully, noting patterns of behavior, who avoided eye contact, and who tried too hard to appear innocent. Then she turned to Miss Tilly Cobb, the shy librarian who often seemed invisible, yet somehow absorbed every detail. "Miss Cobb, you haven't said much," Agatha prompted. The librarian shifted uneasily. Well, I suppose I noticed a small thing," she whispered. "When we discussed the pudding recipes earlier, one guest mentioned adding extra alcohol. But the card they used had faint markings, like a symbol I've seen in the old village archives. I thought it was curious, nothing more." Agatha froze, her mind tracing the thread immediately. A symbol on a recipe card, a scorched scrap of parchment, discrepancies in ingredients, and the subtle tensions among the guests. It all began to connect in a pattern that had escaped everyone's notice. She didn't speak, though. She allowed the comment to hang in the air, watching the guests fidget with growing anxiety. As she continued, Agatha noticed a subtle shift. Conversations became clipped, glances sharper, and the warmth of the storm-lit room no longer offered comfort. Suspicion was thickening like custard on a low flame, and she could feel the moment approaching when the puzzle would demand to be solved. With each confession, each admission of petty grievances or long-held grudges, Agatha filed away the details, matching them against what she had discovered in Jasper's locked room and the events of the evening. She could see now, with surprising clarity, how the pieces might fit. But she said nothing. Instead, she let the room grow tense, the snowstorm howl outside, and the guests squirm under the invisible weight of her scrutiny. The confessions had provided insight, but no culprit. The single thread connecting everything, Miss Cobb's accidental clue, remained her secret for the moment, a delicate filament she would pull only when the time was right. Agatha straightened, hands lightly gripping her notebook. Her mind was alight with possibilities, the outlines of the truth forming quietly, waiting for the perfect moment to surface. Tonight was far from over, and she intended to see it through to the very last, revealing secrets that had festered beneath the cheerful facade of Christmas puddings and festive lights.
Chapter 7. The Final Unraveling. The grand hall was cloaked in a dim golden glow from the chandeliers, their crystals catching the swirling snowstorm outside. Guests gathered hesitantly, standing in small clusters, each face a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Agatha Raisin, notebook in hand, surveyed the room with a calm authority that belied the racing thoughts in her head. Tonight there would be no mistakes. The threads of the evening would be laid bare. "Thank you all for joining me," she began, voice steady yet carrying over the murmurs. "We are, for the moment, snowed in together. That means it's time to review what has happened and consider the facts, step by step." She moved deliberately to the display table, gesturing toward the ruined puddings and the scorched scraps of parchment. First, Jasper Thorne's pudding was tampered with. It was toppled, burned, and left where it could be found. This was no accident. Someone intended for it to be discovered like this. The scorched parchment we found in the kitchen? It matches symbols faintly marked on a recipe earlier this evening, suggesting premeditation and an intimate knowledge of his methods. Heads turned, some pale, some anxious, others averted. Agatha paused to let the weight of her words settle. She could feel the tension coiling in the room, like a spring pulled taut. "Now," she continued, raising a hand, "we know the screen came from the kitchen moments after everyone had arranged their entries. This coincides with someone's sudden absence and the minor disputes over ingredients. These actions were not random. They were calculated, designed to create distraction and confusion." Her gaze landed on Miranda Green and Mrs. Pringle, both stiffening, shifting slightly. Some guests looked genuinely shocked. Others, Agatha suspected, were carefully measuring their reactions. "And finally," she said, lowering her voice slightly, "we have confessions. Grudges, rivalries, financial disagreements, yes, all valid, yet none of these provide a direct explanation for the fatal event. What ties everything together, however, is the symbol on the parchment, combined with knowledge of the recipes and the timed chaos. Only one person could have orchestrated all of these moving pieces without arousing immediate suspicion." A tremor ran through the room. The guilty party shifted, face paling further, hands tightening at their sides. The storm outside raged on, cutting off escape, forcing every secret into the open, and Agatha Raisin, as ever, stood ready to untangle them. Agatha Raisin stood before the gathered guests, the storm outside finally beginning to ease, softening the wind's howl against Thorne Manor. Candlelight reflected off polished surfaces, and the manor seemed to hold its breath. She held the scorched parchment in one hand, her notebook in the other, eyes scanning the room until they rested on a single figure. "Everyone, the time has come to reveal the truth," she began. "The chaos, the toppled puddings, the tampered ingredients, all of it points to one person, someone with knowledge of the manor, the contest, and Jasper's habits.
someone with both motive and opportunity. All eyes turned toward Jasper's cousin, a tall figure who had remained unnervingly composed through every confrontation. But now, a flicker of unease passed across the face, fingers tightening at the sides, a subtle tremor betraying calm pretense. "It was you," Agatha said firmly. "You doctored Jasper's pudding, ensuring he would ingest it at the critical moment. You staged the toppled bowl and planted misleading clues to cast suspicion on others. And you misused your knowledge of the contest rules to create diversions while you acted." The cousin's lips parted, as if to deny it, but no words came. Their eyes darted nervously to the scorched parchment and then to the recipe cards, the timeline of chaos laid bare for all to see. Agatha continued, calmly but with precision. "You intended to inherit the estate," she said. "Every subtle act, the missing utensils, the altered recipes, the staged arguments, was part of a calculated plan. You even exploited the snowstorm to trap us here, thinking no one could intervene. Yet your motive was betrayed by the smallest detail, the hidden heirloom Jasper kept in his private collection. You needed it to prove your claim, and it's why you took such care to manipulate the evening's events." The cousin's composure finally broke. A sharp exhale, then a confession in halting, trembling words. I only wanted what was mine. He would never have willingly given it to me. I didn't mean for anyone else to be hurt." Agatha nodded, letting the tension settle. Harm was unintended for others, yes, but deliberate for Jasper. And the evidence, every inconsistency, every altered ingredient, the scorched parchment, leads directly to you. A knock sounded at the grand doors. Outside, the storm had begun to relent, and now the police arrived, their arrival punctuated by the crunch of boots through snow. Officers entered, taking statements and securing the scene. The guests exhaled collectively, some leaning against tables, others clutching each other's hands. Relief spread through the manor, easing the tension like warm tea after a long winter walk. Agatha surveyed the room, noting the quiet nods and murmurs of gratitude. Justice had been served, and the secrets of Thorn Manor were beginning to settle, piece by piece. The storm had tested them, forced truth into the open, and revealed both the dark motives and the courage required to uncover them. For Agatha, the night had been long, intricate, and challenging, but ultimately rewarding. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, feeling the warmth of the manor, the glow of the candles, and the comforting knowledge that curiosity, attention, and persistence had unraveled yet another mystery in Carsley.
Chapter 8. Christmas returns to Carsley. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the frost-laced windows of Agatha Raisin's cottage, glinting off the snowy rooftops of Carsley. The storm had passed, leaving a blanket of pristine white across the village. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with the crisp, cold air. Agatha stretched in her favorite armchair, a mug of steaming tea warming her hands, and allowed herself a deep sigh of satisfaction. The chaos of the past night felt almost unreal, as if it belonged to someone else's story. A gentle knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. She opened it to find Miss Tilly Cobb standing there, a wicker basket cradled carefully in her arms. "Good morning, Miss Raisin," she said shyly, cheeks flushed from the cold. "I thought you might like a few baked goods, just to celebrate that everything is settled." Agatha smiled, stepping aside to let her in. The basket was filled with golden scones, a small fruitcake, and a jar of spiced jam. The librarian's quiet presence was comforting, and for a moment the village's tension felt like a distant memory. "Thank you, Tilly," Agatha said warmly. "Your timing is perfect." No sooner had Miss Tilly settled at the kitchen table than another knock echoed through the cottage. Bill Wong entered, snowflakes clinging to his coat, carrying an envelope. "Morning, Agatha. Just thought you'd like an update. Official statements have been taken, and the police are closing the case. They said you were instrumental in unraveling everything." He grinned, holding the letter out for her. Agatha accepted it, skimming the formal words. She nodded thoughtfully, the weight of responsibility giving way to quiet pride. "Well," she said, setting the envelope down, "it seems justice has been served, and in time for Christmas." The morning continued with a gentle rhythm. Villagers began to trickle by, stopping for brief visits, recounting the events of the contest with a mixture of horror and humor. Mrs. Bloxby teased about the toppled puddings. John Fletcher recounted his near slip on the icy steps, and even Miranda Green offered a sheepish apology for her earlier tensions. Laughter warmed the room, and Agatha felt the pleasant tug of belonging. Through it all, she reflected on the night's events. The locked doors, the toppled bowls, the scorched parchment, and Jasper Thorne's ill-fated plans. It had been a challenge, but the resolution left her with a quiet satisfaction. She poured another cup of tea and let the sunlight illuminate the familiar coziness of her kitchen, the soft ticking of the clock, a gentle reminder that life, despite chaos, returned to rhythm. Before leaving, Miss Tilly leaned close and whispered, "You know, Agatha, sometimes mysteries seem to find you rather than the other way around." Agatha chuckled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Oh, I think you're right, Tilly, and somehow I have a feeling this is only the beginning." As the morning deepened, snow continued to shimmer across Carsley, children's laughter faintly echoing from the village square. Agatha sat back, a warm blanket around her shoulders, feeling the satisfying hush of calm after turmoil. The world was peaceful once more, yet alive with possibility. Somewhere in the village, another puzzle might already be stirring. But for now, she allowed herself a rare, unhurried smile, content in the comfort of home, friends, and the quiet joy of Christmas returned.
Agatha Raisin had just settled into her favorite armchair, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, when a faint knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Rising carefully, she opened it to find a small, neatly wrapped package resting on the doorstep, dusted with snow. No note accompanied it, and no footprint suggested who might have left it there. Curiosity piqued. She brought the package inside, setting it on the kitchen table with deliberate care. The wrapping paper was festive, deep crimson adorned with tiny golden stars and tied with a delicate gold ribbon. Agatha untied it slowly, savoring the anticipation. Inside, she found the old vintage recipe card she had misplaced during her pudding preparations. It looked freshly restored, the edges crisp, the handwriting clear. On the back, in careful script, was a translation of the strange markings that had once puzzled her. Her eyes scanned the message aloud. "Not all mysteries require solving. Some simply need savoring." She blinked, a smile spreading across her face. The words were whimsical, yet oddly comforting, as if whoever had restored the card understood the charm of life in Carsley, the mix of curiosity, danger, and warmth that always seemed to find its way into her world. Tucked beneath the card was a sprig of holly, its berries bright against the deep green leaves, secured with a thin ribbon of gold that gleamed in the firelight. Agatha lifted it gently, inhaling the faint scent of winter pine. It was small, elegant, and thoughtful, a gesture that radiated kindness and subtle humor. She placed the card and holly on the table, leaning back in her chair with a soft chuckle. Whoever had sent this had a sense of timing, of theater, and perhaps of knowing her better than she realized. There was no signature, no clue to the giver's identity, yet she felt touched rather than puzzled. Some mysteries, she mused, were indeed meant to remain partially unsolved, leaving room for imagination and delight. Her eyes wandered to the window, where the snow continued to glisten under the pale morning sun. The village beyond was waking slowly, children's laughter ringing faintly from the square. She wrapped herself in her blanket, holding her tea close, feeling the cozy satisfaction that followed resolution. The events at Thorne Manor, the toppled puddings, the scorched parchment, the locked doors, all of it felt like a chapter in a story now safely closed, yet leaving a gentle nudge toward whatever might come next. She traced a finger over the words on the card again, the simplicity of the message resonating with her. "Some mysteries just need savoring," she murmured, the corners of her mouth lifting. She placed the card back on the table beside her tea and glanced at the holly, the gold ribbon catching the light. A quiet laughter bubbled from her lips, part amusement, part contentment, part the thrill of knowing that in Carsley, even after chaos, life and Christmas held small, unexpected delights. The cottage was warm, the snow outside sparkling, and Agatha Raisin, ever curious, ever ready, allowed herself to enjoy the moment fully, savoring the mystery, the comfort, and the gentle promise of adventures yet to come.